The desert breathes. In the quiet hour before dawn, a wind older than memory moves across the Giza plateau. It whispers over dunes, sighs against the great pyramids, and finally it touches the face of a lion. The Sphinx. It sits, a colossal creature of riddles carved from the living bedrock of the earth, staring eternally eastward. For centuries, we have looked into that weathered face and believed we knew its story. We learned it was built for a pharaoh named Khafre, a portrait in stone gazing at his own pyramid. We built a tidy timeline, a comfortable history. But the stone itself tells a different story. It speaks in the language of water. Look closely at the deep, undulating grooves carved into the Sphinx's flanks, the cavernous hollows in its sides. These are not the scars of sand and wind. They are the signature of rain, of relentless, pouring, torrential rain. And to find the last time such rains fell upon the Sahara, we must journey back not 4,500 years, but to a forgotten age over 10,000 years ago, to a time when the desert was a green and soggy land. This is the heart of the mystery. This is the crack in the wall of history. If the water that shaped the Sphinx evaporated from the world before the first pharaoh drew breath, then who built it? What vanished hands carved this guardian? And what, in its silent vigil, has it been waiting all these millennia to reveal? The story we are about to uncover is not one of simple answers. It is a journey into a shadowy pre-dawn of human civilization, a quest that challenges the very foundations of archaeology, and a confrontation with the possibility that our past is far deeper and far stranger than we ever dared to dream. The first light of morning paints the Sphinx in hues of gold and shadow, and for a moment the modern world falls away. This is how travelers have seen it for ages, a sudden and shocking emergence from the desert floor. It is immense. From its paw to its tail stretches the length of a city block. Its head, once crowned perhaps with the striped Nemes headdress of a king, rises as high as a 6-story building. The face, though battered by time and target of centuries of gunfire, still holds a calm, inscrutable expression. For most of recorded history, it was buried up to its neck in sand, a floating head in a sea of dust. Napoleon's men saw only this head, and the French soldiers, legend says, fired their cannons at it, shattering the nose that was likely gone centuries before. It was a monument of mystery even to the ancient Egyptians. They called it Hor-em-Akhit, Horus of the horizon. They worshipped it as a sun god, built a temple between its colossal paws, and left Stele praising its power. But they left no building plans, no architect's signature. The silence of its origins was already ancient in their time. For modern Egyptology, born in the 19th century with the deciphering of the Rosetta Stone and the dawn of scientific excavation, the Sphinx needed a place in the known chronology. The evidence seemed clear. It sits in the shadow of the second pyramid at Giza, attributed to the 4th dynasty Pharaoh Khafre, who ruled around 2500 BCE. A diorite statue of Khafre found nearby shows a face with a striking resemblance to the Sphinx. The layout of the Sphinx Temple and the Valley Temple, connected by a causeway to Khafre's pyramid, suggested a single, unified complex. The logic was elegant and convincing. The Sphinx, therefore, was Khafre's. It was his portrait as a divine guardian, a symbol of royal power carved from a leftover mound of limestone during the construction of his pyramid. This became the orthodox story, repeated in textbooks and museum placards around the world. It was a closed case. But then, in the 1950s, a whisper of dissent began, not from an archaeologist, but from a man who looked at the stone with different eyes. René Schwaller de Lubic's, a French mystic and mathematician, spent years studying the Temple of Luxor. He was obsessed with the idea of a sacred science in ancient Egypt, a lost knowledge encoded in stone. When he turned his gaze to the Sphinx, he saw something disturbing. The erosion on the body of the Sphinx, he argued, was not consistent with wind and sand, which sculpt in sharp, horizontal lines. This was deep, vertical, rolling, undulating wear. To him, it looked like water damage. He published this observation as a minor point in a larger, esoteric work. The academic world took little notice. It was a fringe idea from a fringe thinker. The seed of heresy, however, had been planted. It lay dormant for 2 decades until it found the perfect mind to nurture it, that of a young, passionate, and decidedly unconventional scholar named John Anthony West. West was not a credentialed Egyptologist. He was a writer, a researcher, and a follower of the philosophical school of traditionalism, which believed in a common ancient wisdom handed down from a lost, advanced civilization. He read Schwaller's work and was electrified by that single observation about water erosion. To West, it was not a minor detail. It was the key that could unlock history's greatest secret. If the erosion on the Sphinx was caused by heavy rainfall, then the entire timeline of civilization was wrong. Because to find that kind of sustained, torrential rain in Egypt, you had to go back to the end of the last ice age, to a climatic period geologists call the Neolithic subpluvial, a time of lush greenery and monsoons in the Sahara that ended around 5000 BCE, over 2,000 years before Kafir was even born. West's mind raced with the implications. He needed proof. He needed to bring a scientist, a geologist, to the Sphinx to read the stone like a book. He needed to turn a poetic hunch into hard, empirical evidence. His quest would ignite a firestorm of controversy that would rage for decades, pitting rigid academia against radical revision, and force the world to look at the old guardian with entirely new and deeply unsettling eyes. John Anthony West knew that to challenge the towering edifice of orthodox Egyptology, he could not rely on philosophy or intuition alone. He needed the cold, hard language of science. His quest led him to the door of Dr. Robert M. Schoch, a geologist and professor at Boston University. Schoch was a specialist in paleontology and the weathering of rock surfaces over immense spans of time. He was, by his own admission, initially deeply skeptical of West's proposal. The idea that the Sphinx could be thousands of years older than the pyramids flew in the face of everything he and the world understood about human history. It smacked of the kind of sensationalism he, as a scientist, instinctively distrusted. Yet West was persistent, and the logic of the erosion argument was, from a geological standpoint, intriguing enough to warrant a look. Schoch agreed to examine the evidence, believing he would quickly be able to debunk it and put the matter to rest. It was a decision that would irrevocably change the course of his career. In the early 1990s, West and Schoch arrived at Giza. For Schoch, it was not a pilgrimage to a mystical site, but a field examination of a geological formation. He approached the Sphinx enclosure, the great limestone pit from which the statue had been carved, with a scientist's dispassionate eye. He ignored the grandeur of the head and focused instead on the body, on the walls of the enclosure that surrounded it. What he saw immediately struck him as anomalous. The weathering patterns were not uniform. The Sphinx itself and the walls of the enclosure showed two distinct types of erosion. On the upper sections, more recent limestone layers showed classic Aeolian or wind-driven erosion. It was sharp, flaky, and followed the bedding planes of the rock. But on the lower sections, particularly on the Sphinx's body and the lower enclosure walls, the erosion was profoundly different. Here were those deep, sinuous, rolling undulations, vertical channels and coves that looked like giant Swiss cheese. Skok knelt, running his hands over the stone. This was textbook fluvial erosion, the kind caused by water runoff. But not just any water, not the Nile's floods, which would leave horizontal lines of sediment. This was precipitation. This was rain, and lots of it, falling over a long period of time. Skok's mind began to cross-reference dates with climatic data. The Giza Plateau is composed of sedimentary limestone layers, some softer, some harder. The Sphinx's body is carved from the softer member, which would weather more quickly. The precise pattern of the erosion indicated the rock had been exposed to the elements for a very long time, subjected to a climate that Egypt had not experienced since the transition from the last ice age. Geologists knew that around 10,000 to 5,000 BCE, the Sahara was not a desert. It was a savanna, a grassy plain with lakes and rivers, teeming with life, as evidenced by cave paintings in places like the Tassili Enager in Algeria that show giraffes and crocodiles. This period, the Neolithic subpluvial, ended as the Earth's orbit shifted, and the region began its gradual, relentless descent into hyper-aridity. By 2500 BCE, the time of Khafre, the Sahara was as dry as it is today, with only the occasional, rare thunderstorm. The conclusion, from a purely geological standpoint, was inescapable. The heavy, rainfall-induced erosion on the Sphinx core body had to have occurred before the desertification was complete. Skok estimated that to create such deep weathering would require not centuries, but millennia of exposure to a wet climate. He initially proposed a conservative revision, suggesting the Sphinx's origins lay perhaps in the period of 5,000 to 7,000 BCE, a time of pre-dynastic Neolithic cultures in Egypt. But even this was revolutionary. It pushed the Sphinx's origins back at least 2,000 years before Khafre, and over 1,000 years before the generally accepted beginning of dynastic Egyptian civilization around 3100 BCE. This wasn't just tweaking a date. It was suggesting that a monument of staggering sophistication and scale existed in a time when humanity was supposedly living in simple, small-scale agricultural villages, without the tools, the organization, or the artistic tradition for such a feat. The implications were staggering. If the Sphinx was that old, then who built it? And more terrifying to the established order, what else might be wrong with our story of human origins? Skok and West had not just found anomalous erosion, they had opened a crack in time itself. The publication of Robert Skok's geological findings was not a gentle ripple in the academic pond. It was a detonation. John Anthony West, a master of media, presented the theory in a documentary with Charlton Heston's sonorous voice giving it gravitas. The public was captivated. The idea of a lost civilization, of a history far deeper than taught in schools, touched a nerve. But within the hallowed halls of Egyptology, the reaction was one of cold, furious rejection. The theory was not merely debated, it was condemned. The fortress of established chronology, built stone by stone over a century of scholarship, was under assault, and its guardians rallied to defend it. The counter-arguments came swiftly, and they were multifaceted. Some Egyptologists pointed to the simple lack of evidence. If a culture advanced enough to carve the Sphinx existed in Egypt around 7000 BCE or earlier, where were their cities, their tools, their pottery? The archaeological record showed only the simple Stone Age cultures of the Fayum and Merimd hunter-gatherers transitioning to farming. They left behind grinding stones and simple huts, not megalithic sculpture. The leap from that to the Sphinx seemed impossible. It was an argument from silence, but a powerful one. Absence of evidence, they insisted, is evidence of absence. Other critics attacked the geological interpretation itself. Perhaps the erosion wasn't from rain, but from wind-driven sand and chemical weathering from dew or groundwater capillary action. Maybe the limestone was simply of poor quality, and the weathering patterns were a result of its inconsistent layers. Some suggested that the heavy rains of the earlier period were not necessary. Perhaps even the occasional, rare torrential downpours in the desert, over thousands of years, could have produced the effects. The debate grew technical and heated, a clash between two different languages, the language of cultural context and artifacts versus the language of geomorphology and paleoclimatology. But the most personal and cutting criticism was aimed at the messengers themselves. Skok was dismissed as a geologist out of his depth, a dupe of sensationalists. West was branded a pseudo-scientist, a mere popularizer with a mystical agenda, trying to force facts to fit a preconceived theory of a lost Atlantean civilization. The association with earlier, more fringe authors like Schwaller de Lubicz was used to taint the new data by guilt of association. Academia, in many ways, closed ranks. To accept the water erosion theory was not just to change a date. It was to invalidate the life's work of generations of scholars, to throw the entire narrative of early civilization into chaos. The cost of being wrong was unthinkable. Yet, amidst the firestorm, the stone of the Sphinx remained. And for every objection, West, Skok, and a growing number of other researchers began to find what they saw as compelling responses. The archaeological silence could be explained, they argued, by the fact that no one had been looking for a high civilization from that epoch. What if its remnants lay buried under meters of Nile silt, or had been completely obliterated by later dynastic construction? They pointed to mysterious, massive stone boxes found at the Serapeum of Saqqara, boxes of such precision, and weight that they defied easy explanation even for the dynastic Egyptians. They began to look not just at the Sphinx, but at everything around it with new, questioning eyes. The debate had solidified into a trench war, with two sides staring at the same monument and seeing two entirely different pasts. The Sphinx, meanwhile, endured the shouting in its eternal silence, its body a battlefield not of armies, but of ideas. Its weathered flanks the central evidence in the trial of human history. The stalemate demanded new evidence, not just from the surface of the stone, but from the ground beneath it and from the very stars above. As the debate over the Sphinx's age raged between geologists and Egyptologists, another line of inquiry emerged, one that reached beyond the earth to the vault of the heavens. This was the domain of archaeoastronomy, the study of how ancient peoples understood and incorporated celestial events into their monuments. And it was here that a radical new theory found its footing, not from a geologist, but from a writer and researcher named John Anthony West and a rogue Egyptologist named Robert Bovell. Their proposition was audacious. The Sphinx was not just a solitary statue, but part of a giant, intentional pattern on the Giza plateau, a pattern written in stone and stars, and its true age was encoded in the slow, majestic dance of the constellations. The key, they argued, lay in the Sphinx's unwavering gaze due east. Every equinox, the rising sun crowns its head, but Bovell looked further back to a phenomenon called the precession of the equinoxes. This is a grand, 26,000-year cycle caused by the wobble of the Earth's axis. Over this vast period, the backdrop of stars against which the sun rises at the equinox slowly shifts. Each constellation serves as the house of the sun for about 2,160 years in an era known as an astrological age. We are currently in the age of Pisces, moving into Aquarius. The Sphinx, with the body of a lion and the head of a man, could be a celestial marker. What if, they asked, it was built to mark the age of Leo? Bovell and West calculated backwards. The last time the constellation Leo rose heliacally, meaning just before dawn, in a position that could be symbolically guarded by a lion statue facing east, on the spring equinox was around 10,500 BCE. This was not a random date. It aligned eerily with the climatic window Scott had proposed from the geological evidence. The end of the last ice age, the time of the Neolithic subpluvial. The theory wove together earth and sky. The Sphinx's body, a lion, mirrored the constellation Leo, dominating the eastern horizon at the vernal equinox in 10,500 BCE. The three pyramids of Giza, Bovell further proposed in his famous Orion correlation theory, mirrored the three stars of Orion's belt as they appeared in the same epoch. The entire Giza plateau, therefore, was not just a fourth dynasty cemetery, but a vast, pre-programmed celestial map, a frozen moment in the great processional clock, built to memorialize a first time, a golden age of gods or ancestors. The reaction from mainstream scholars was one of profound scorn. They dismissed the Sphinx-Leo correlation as a classic case of confirmation bias, of selectively interpreting vague symbols to fit a desired date. They pointed out that the Sphinx's head, while clearly human, was not definitively that of a pharaoh from 2500 BCE, let alone a lion from 10,500 BCE. It was heavily recarved, possibly many times. The link between the pyramids and Orion's belt, while visually intriguing, required ignoring several other stars and accepting a mirror image of the constellation that seemed arbitrary. The idea of a civilization sophisticated enough to understand and record the 26,000-year processional cycle over 12,000 years ago was, to them, pure fantasy, with no supporting archaeological evidence whatsoever. Yet, for the public and for those drawn to the mystery, the celestial theory added a layer of profound, almost mystical coherence. It provided a why. Why build such an enduring monument? To mark a foundational epoch in human or even divine history. It transformed the Sphinx from a royal vanity project into a cosmic sentinel, a time capsule aimed at the stars. The debate was now a triangle, geology against archaeology, with astronomy whispering an even more ancient secret. The fortress of orthodox history was being besieged on multiple fronts, but the defenders held a powerful card: the lack of a smoking gun. Where was the civilization that could have done this? To answer that, the search would have to move from the sky and the surface of the stone to the very ground beneath the Sphinx's paws, and into the shadowy realm of hinted chambers and secret tunnels. The legend of a hall of records, waiting beneath the Guardian, was about to move from myth to the center of a very modern investigation. The sands of Giza hold more than just stone. They hold whispers. For centuries, local legend and esoteric tradition have spoken of a secret hidden beneath the Sphinx. Edgar Cayce, the American sleeping prophet, gave this myth potent new life in the 1930s. In one of his trance readings, he spoke of a lost civilization, Atlantis, and a great library of their knowledge, a hall of records, buried somewhere near the Sphinx. He described a hidden entrance between the statue's paws, leading down to a chamber containing scrolls and artifacts from a vanished world, waiting to be rediscovered in a time of global change. For Cayce's followers, this was not a fable, but a prophecy. And for researchers like John Anthony West, it was a clue. If the Sphinx was vastly older, perhaps it wasn't just a statue. Perhaps it was a marker, a guardian for something buried deep below. The quest to find what lay beneath became an obsession. Ground-penetrating radar surveys in the 1970s and later in the 1990s seemed to fuel the fire. They revealed tantalizing anomalies, cavities and shafts in the bedrock beneath and around the Sphinx. One series of surveys, led by researchers from Florida State University and later by a team from Japan, suggested the possibility of a large, rectangular chamber beneath the Sphinx's front paws, and tunnel-like features running deep into the plateau. To the proponents of the older Sphinx theory, this was the potential physical evidence they needed. The Hall of Records might not contain Atlantean crystals, but it could be a time capsule from the Sphinx's true builders, a sealed context that could rewrite history with a single discovery. The Egyptian authorities, represented by the Supreme Council of Antiquities, found themselves in a difficult position. The allure of a major discovery was immense, but so was the risk. The Sphinx is fragile. Its body is a crumbling mass of soft limestone, plagued by rising groundwater from nearby village irrigation and the destructive effects of modern pollution. Excavating deeply around its base could be catastrophically destabilizing. Furthermore, the idea of a lost civilization predating the Pharaohs was politically and culturally sensitive. Egypt's national identity is powerfully tied to the Pharaonic era as the glorious dawn of its civilization. A discovery that shifted that dawn thousands of years earlier, and possibly to a different, unknown people, was a prospect fraught with complication. Access to the Sphinx for deep, intrusive investigation became tightly controlled. Permits for seismic surveys or drilling were often denied, or the results of such surveys were downplayed or explained away as natural fissures in the bedrock. The official stance leaned towards conservation, not high-risk exploration. This, in turn, fueled accusations of a cover-up from those convinced of the secret. They argued that the authorities were afraid of what might be found, afraid of toppling the established narrative and the tourism-centric version of history. The tension between passionate amateur investigators and cautious, defensive officialdom created a shadowy backdrop to the mystery. Every denied permit, every ambiguous radar reading, every whispered rumor of a discovered shaft that was quickly sealed added another layer to the legend. The Sphinx, therefore, stood not only as a geological and astronomical riddle, but as a potential archaeological lockbox. Its greatest secret might not be on its weathered surface, but in the darkness below. The promise of the Hall of Records, whether a literal library, a burial chamber of an unknown king, or simply a void in the rock, became the holy grail of the revisionist quest. It represented the hope for a single, definitive piece of evidence that could break the stalemate, an artifact with a date, a name, a story older than the sands of Egypt. Until that chamber was opened and examined under rigorous scientific control, the legend would persist, a ghost in the debate, a siren's call urging believers to look deeper, to dig, to dare to uncover what the Guardian had been built to protect for so many thousands of years. The mystery was no longer just about erosion. It was about what lay in the profound and protected silence beneath the giant's paws. As the debate swirled around its body and what lay beneath, the Sphinx's own face presented another layer of enigma. The visage that stares eastward is weathered, battered, but unmistakably human. Orthodox Egyptology identifies it as Pharaoh Khafre, a conclusion drawn from the statue's proximity to his pyramid and a single weathered diorite statue found in the Valley Temple. But a closer, critical look raises troubling questions. The head is strikingly small in proportion to the massive leonine body. It gives the impression of being a later modification, a knob of harder stone recarved from a larger original shape. What if, some researchers asked, the Sphinx did not always have this human face? What if it began its existence as something else entirely? The most popular alternative theory is that the Sphinx was originally a full lion statue. The lion was a potent symbol of the sun and celestial power in ancient times, and a lion gazing at the constellation Leo in 10,500 BCE would make profound symbolic sense. Over millennia, the head, the most exposed part, would have weathered severely. Then, much later, during the dynastic period, a pharaoh like Khafre, or perhaps his father Khufu, could have commandeered the ancient, venerated monument. They would have reshaped the ruined lion's head into their own likeness, a common practice of pharaonic appropriation, claiming the antiquity's power for themselves. This would explain the glaring disproportion. The body, carved from a single limestone mound, was built to the scale of a lion. A human head on that scale would be enormous. The current head, scaled to a human, looks like an afterthought. But the anomalies of the head do not end with its size. There is the matter of the missing nose. Popular legend blames Napoleon's army, but sketches from the 18th century, before Napoleon's arrival, show the nose already absent. Earlier Arab historians attribute its destruction to a Sufi Muslim named Sam al-Dar in the 14th century, who defaced it in an act of iconoclasm. Yet the damage seems more extensive than a simple knocking off. The face is also scarred by what looks like deliberate tool marks, and the remnants of a ceremonial beard, pieces of which are in the British Museum in Cairo, were attached in later dynastic times. The head is a palimpsest, a stone canvas written over by different hands across different epochs. Then there is the haunting question of paint. Traces of red ochre pigment have been found on the face, and it is widely accepted that the entire Sphinx was once brightly painted, a terrifying and awe-inspiring spectacle of red, yellow, and blue glaring across the plateau. This practice aligns with dynastic Egyptian art. But if the head is a recarving, what colors, what original expression did it wear for those first thousands of years? Was it the tawny gold of a desert lion or something even more mysterious? The riddle of the head forces a confrontation with the psychology of history. Monuments are not static. They are reused, reclaimed, reinterpreted. The dynastic Egyptians clearly revered the Sphinx as ancient even in their time. The dream stele, erected between its paws by the New Kingdom Pharaoh Thutmose IV, tells a story of the Sphinx speaking to him as a sun god, promising kingship in return for clearing away the sand that choked it. This is not the story of a new statue, but of the restoration of a primordial, divine entity. The head, therefore, becomes the focal point of a cultural conversation across time. Is it the proud portrait of a fourth dynasty king, or is it a later mask placed upon a far older, more primal being? The answer lies in the stone itself, in the subtle tool marks and weathering patterns that might distinguish an original carving from a drastic renovation. But like so much with the Sphinx, accessing that answer up close with the freedom to truly study it remains locked behind barriers of preservation, politics, and dogma. The face, the very symbol of the mystery, keeps its secrets behind a veil of erosion and human intervention, a silent reminder that the guardian's true identity may be hidden in plain sight. Standing directly before the Sphinx, between its colossal paws, are the ruins of two temples. These structures, known as the Sphinx Temple and the Valley Temple, often associated with Khafre, are central to the orthodox dating of the complex. They are built from the same local limestone core blocks as the Sphinx enclosure and are aligned with stunning precision to the statue. The official story states they were built by Khafre as part of a unified mortuary complex. Yet when one looks closer, particularly at the Valley Temple, a startling and often overlooked detail emerges, a detail that whispers of a different history. The foundations and the lowest courses of these temples are not made of limestone. They are built from monstrous blocks of red granite, a stone that does not exist anywhere on the Giza plateau. This red granite was quarried from Aswan, over 500 miles to the south. Transporting these blocks, some weighing over 100 tons, down the Nile on barges and then hauling them up to the plateau would have been a Herculean feat even for the master builders of the Fourth Dynasty. But the mystery deepens. The granite blocks are not simply stacked. They are mind-bogglingly massive, some larger than those used in the king's chamber of the Great Pyramid. They are dressed and fitted together with a precision that is almost inhuman, joints so tight that a razor blade cannot slip between them. This is a style of megalithic construction that speaks of an incredible, almost obsessive craftsmanship. And it stands in stark contrast to the upper sections of the temples, which are built from the rougher, smaller limestone blocks more typical of the dynastic period. To proponents of the older Sphinx theory, this is a glaring architectural anomaly that screams of different construction phases, separated by vast stretches of time. They propose a radical sequence of events. First, in the remote, wet period around 10,500 BCE or earlier, the Sphinx itself was carved from the bedrock, and the great limestone core blocks removed from around it were used to build the first inner structure of the temples. Then catastrophe. The climate changed, the rains stopped, and the sands began to claim the site. The Sphinx and its temples were buried and forgotten for millennia. Then, thousands of years later, the early dynastic Egyptians, perhaps even Khufu's predecessors, rediscovered the site. They recognized it as a sacred, ancient place of immense power. They cleared the sands, and in awe of the Cyclopean limestone work, they sought to restore and enhance it. They added the upper limestone courses in their own style. But the foundations, the crucial first layer, were made of those impossible granite blocks. Why? Perhaps the original limestone foundations had weathered and shifted during the long burial. Perhaps they wanted to fortify the sacred site for eternity with the hardest stone they knew. The act would be one of reverence, not creation, a rebuilding upon a revered, pre-existing sacred site, much like medieval cathedrals were often built upon ancient pagan holy grounds. This interpretation turns the orthodox timeline on its head. It suggests the Sphinx complex is not a single fourth dynasty building project, but an architectural palimpsest. The oldest layer is the Sphinx body and the megalithic limestone core of the temples, showing water erosion. The next layer is the dynastic restoration, the recarved head, the added granite cladding and foundations, the upper temple walls. This would explain why no pharaonic inscriptions have been found within the core of the Sphinx temple itself, because it was already ancient and holy, and to deface it with boasts would have been sacrilege. The temples, then, become not the context that dates the Sphinx, but later additions that pay homage to it. They are the work of a civilization encountering the legacy of a forgotten one, struggling to match its engineering in a desperate, granite-clad attempt to honor and stabilize a mystery they themselves could no longer fully understand. The debate over the Sphinx's age had now expanded from geology and astronomy into the very stones of its temples. It was no longer a quiet academic disagreement. It was a full-blown clash of worldviews, broadcast on television documentaries and splashed across the pages of popular books. On one side stood the establishment, the Egyptological orthodoxy, their fortress built on generations of scholarship, cultural context, and a carefully reconstructed chronology. On the other stood the revisionists, a coalition of geologists, astronomers, independent researchers, and passionate amateurs, armed with what they saw as empirical data from outside the traditional field. The battlefield was the public mind, and the Sphinx was the ultimate prize. The arguments crystallized into two fundamentally different ways of seeing history. For the orthodox Egyptologist, context was everything. You could not understand a monument in isolation. The Sphinx existed within an ecosystem of evidence. The pyramid complex of Khufu, the workmen's barracks found nearby, the style of the carving that matched other Fourth Dynasty art, the entire developmental arc of Egyptian culture from simple pit graves to mastabas to step pyramids to true pyramids. To pluck the Sphinx out of this sequence and hurl it thousands of years into the past was to create a historical orphan, a monstrous anomaly with no family, no cultural lineage, no logical place in the story of human progress. It violated the principle of Occam's razor. The simplest explanation that Kafir built it was the most likely. The water erosion, they argued, could be explained by other means: groundwater seepage, wind-driven abrasive sand, or the poor quality of the limestone itself. The granite blocks in the temple were simply a testament to Kafir's wealth and ambition, not evidence of a repair job on a pre-existing ruin. For the revisionists, however, the orthodox view was blinkered, a case of experts refusing to see evidence that lay outside their specialty. They accused Egyptology of being a closed shop, protecting its turf and its narrative from disruptive scientific data. To them, the geology was not a side issue. It was the direct testimony of the stone, unbiased by human theory. You could argue about the meaning of a potsherd or the translation of a glyph, but you could not argue with the physics of water erosion. The stark difference between the weathering on the Sphinx enclosure and the weathering on the much later tombs cut into the nearby cliffs, tombs everyone agreed were from the Fourth Dynasty, was, to them, a smoking gun. The orthodox explanations for the erosion seemed like increasingly desperate attempts to preserve a crumbling timeline. The revisionists saw themselves as true scientists, following the data wherever it led, even if it led to a terrifying and revolutionary conclusion about human history. The media loved the conflict. It was the perfect story: brave outsiders challenging a stuffy, entrenched academy. Documentaries presented the mystery with dramatic music and haunting visuals, often giving the revisionists a compelling platform. This, in turn, angered many professional Egyptologists who felt their life's work was being caricatured and dismissed by sensationalists. The debate grew personal, sometimes bitter. Careers were affected. Geologists who sided with Skok found their papers rejected from mainstream archaeological journals. The two sides talked past each other, one speaking the language of culture and artifacts, the other the language of rainfall and procession. In this stalemate, the quest for new evidence became more urgent. The revisionists needed to find something tangible, an artifact, an inscription, a tool from the older layer. The orthodox scholars needed to definitively disprove the water erosion hypothesis with their own geological studies. The Sphinx, in its silent dignity, became a mirror reflecting a deep human tension between the comfort of a known story and the terrifying, exhilarating possibility of a forgotten one. The battle was not just about a statue. It was about who gets to write history and how much mystery we are willing to allow into our understanding of the human past. The next moves would require not just argument, but exploration, technology, and a willingness to dig deeper into the secrets the sands had guarded for so long. If the Sphinx was truly a product of a time over 10,000 years ago, a crushing question demanded an answer. Who were its builders? The orthodox timeline offered the familiar, storied culture of the Pyramid Age. But the revisionist timeline pointed to a void, a blank space on the historical map labeled only with climatic data and geological inference. The search for these hypothetical builders became a detective story with no body, a pursuit of ghosts in the deep past. Where does one look for a civilization that left behind a colossus but seemingly no cities, no writing, no tools? The first place to look was right underfoot, but deeper than anyone had previously thought to dig. The Giza Plateau is not a pristine archaeological site. It is a complex, multi-layered palimpsest. Later Egyptian activity, millennia of sand deposition, and even modern debris have buried the earliest layers under meters of material. Proponents of the older Sphinx argue that no serious, extensive excavation has ever been conducted to search for occupation layers or structures dating to the Neolithic wet period. They point to mysterious features like the so-called Wall of the Crow on the plateau's southern edge, a massive, crude stone wall of unknown age and purpose, as a potential candidate for a much older construction. They ask, what if the foundations of the builders' settlements lie buried under the very sand that filled the Sphinx enclosure, or under the modern villages that now press against the plateau's edge? The archaeological silence might simply be because no one has listened in the right places, with the right expectations. Beyond Giza, the search expanded to other enigmatic sites that defy easy classification. On the other side of the world, the giant stone heads of Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, dated to over 11,000 years ago, shattered the previous understanding of Neolithic capabilities. Here was proof that hunter-gatherers could organize, carve massive stones, and create monumental ritual sites. If that was possible in Anatolia, why not in the green Sahara of the same period? In Egypt itself, there were puzzling artifacts. The Nabta Playa stone circle in the western desert, dated to around 7,000 BCE, shows sophisticated astronomical knowledge. Could its builders have been the cultural descendants or even contemporaries of the Sphinx's creators? There were also the mysterious boxes in the Serapeum at Saqqara, granite sarcophagi of unimaginable precision, and weight that even the dynastic Egyptians seemed to revere as ancient. Were these relics of an earlier, lost technology? The most speculative yet compelling idea was that the builders were not a lost civilization in the Atlantean sense, but a sophisticated, integrated culture that thrived during the Neolithic subpluvial. This was a time when the Sahara was a vast, interconnected network of grasslands, lakes, and rivers. People could have moved and traded across what is now an impassable desert. Their monuments might not have been cities of stone, but structures aligned to the stars, built in sacred locations like Giza, which may have been a spiritual center. When the climate changed abruptly around 5,000 BCE, and the desert began to swallow the green, this culture would have faced catastrophe. Their populations would have been forced to migrate to the only permanent source of water, the Nile Valley. They would have brought their knowledge, their myths, and their astronomical lore with them. Over generations, this knowledge became the foundation upon which dynastic Egyptian civilization was built. The Sphinx, then, would not be an orphan, but the primordial ancestor. The lion of the desert, guardian of the age of Leo, would be the mythical forebear of the human-faced pharaohs who came later. its meaning preserved but its origins fading into the realm of gods and the first time described in later Egyptian cosmology. This theory offers a bridge, however speculative, across the void. It suggests that the builders of the Sphinx did not vanish without a trace. They may have been absorbed, their legacy becoming the bedrock of the world's first recognizable state. Their greatest monument, recarved and revered by later kings, would stand as a silent testament to a forgotten dawn, a ghost in the genealogy of civilization. The search for them, therefore, is not just a hunt for ruins, but for echoes in the earliest Egyptian religious texts, in the sudden, seemingly inexplicable flowering of pyramid technology, in the deep, abiding reverence the pyramid builders themselves showed for the ancient, weathered guardian gazing out from the sands of time. As the theories grew more expansive, the core scientific battleground remained the stone itself. The debate over the erosion patterns entered a new, more technical phase, moving from television documentaries back into the realm of peer-reviewed journals and specialized conferences. Both sides knew that to win the argument, they had to own the narrative of the weathering. It was no longer enough to simply point and say rain or wind. They had to prove it. Geologists sympathetic to the orthodox view launched their own studies. They proposed alternative mechanisms for the deep, rolling hollows. One prominent theory focused on hieroglyphs, the weathering caused by salt. Groundwater drawn up through the porous limestone could carry dissolved salts. When the water evaporates at the surface, the salt crystals form and expand, prying the rock apart grain by grain. This process, combined with the abrasive action of wind-blown sand, could, they argued, create rounded features over time. They pointed out that the lower parts of the Sphinx enclosure, where the weathering is most severe, are in contact with the ground and more susceptible to capillary moisture, even in a dry climate. Other studies suggested that dew formation, a common phenomenon in the desert, could provide enough moisture for chemical dissolution over millennia. The argument was that you did not need a rainy climate. You just needed time and the right geochemical conditions. Robert Schoch and his colleagues responded with detailed counter-arguments. They agreed that salt weathering and wind erosion were present, but insisted they were secondary effects, superimposed on a pre-existing landscape of water-carved channels. They presented comparative photographs. They showed the Sphinx's erosion next to known examples of fluvial runoff weathering in wet climates. The match was visually striking. They then contrasted it with wind-eroded limestone outcrops in the desert, which showed sharp, layered, and angular features, completely different from the Sphinx's undulating forms. They addressed the groundwater issue. The severe erosion is not just at the very base where groundwater would concentrate, but runs high up on the Sphinx's back and the enclosure walls, consistent with sheet runoff from rainfall cascading over the edges. They also pointed to the pedestal on which the Sphinx sits. The floor of the enclosure is harder rock, but around the statue's base, the softer layers have been deeply eaten away, creating a sheltered alcove under the body. This, they argued, is classic undercutting from water splashing and pooling at the foot of a cliff face, not from rising damp. The debate grew fiercely technical, a duel of geomorphological models. But for Schoch, the clincher remained a simple observational fact found elsewhere on the plateau. Just a few hundred yards from the Sphinx, there are tombs cut into the cliff faces, tombs with inscriptions dating them unequivocally to the 4th dynasty, the time of Khafre. These tombs have been exposed to the same wind, the same sand, the same salt-laden dew, and the same potential groundwater for the same 4,500 years as the Sphinx in the orthodox timeline. Yet their weathering is minimal, sharp, and linear. They look freshly cut compared to the Sphinx's deeply ravaged body. If the same local processes were acting equally on both, why were the results so dramatically different? The only variable, Skok contended, was time and a different climate during the statue's early exposure. The tombs were cut after the desert was dry. The Sphinx, he believed, had weathered for thousands of years before the desert arrived, bearing the brutal signature of a forgotten rainstorm that lasted for epochs. This side-by-side comparison became, for many, the most powerful visual evidence in the entire controversy. It was a simple question written in stone. Why do two neighboring structures made of the same rock look so catastrophically different? The answer, depending on who you asked, either reinforced a comfortable history or shattered it, leaving only the echo of ancient downpours and a mystery as deep as the weathered channels themselves. Between the colossal stone paws of the Sphinx stands a slab of granite taller than a person. This is the dream stele, erected by the New Kingdom Pharaoh Thutmose IV over 1,000 years after the time of Khafre. To orthodox Egyptology, it is a later monument commemorating the restoration of a then ancient statue. But to those listening for whispers from a deeper past, the text inscribed upon it carries cryptic, haunting significance. It tells a story not of construction, but of rediscovery and divine inheritance, a story that may hold a faint, distorted memory of the Sphinx's true, primordial origin. The tale on the stele is captivating. Prince Thutmose, resting in the shadow of the Sphinx during a hunting trip, falls asleep. The statue, then known as Harmakhit, Horus in the horizon, speaks to him in a dream. The sun god complains that his body is choked by the desert sand, and he promises Thutmose the throne of Egypt if he will clear it away. The prince obeys, and upon becoming pharaoh, he erects this stele to commemorate the divine intervention. The story is typically interpreted as political propaganda, a fabricated divine endorsement for a prince who may not have been the direct heir. But the details are telling. The Sphinx is not portrayed as a new monument or a royal portrait. It is a suffering god, an ancient entity buried by time, its very form threatened by neglect. Thutmose does not claim to have built it, he claims to have rescued it. This aligns perfectly with the revisionist idea of the Sphinx as a pre-existing, archaic monument that the dynastic Egyptians periodically rediscovered and restored. Furthermore, the name Harmakhit is revealing. Horus is a sky god, often depicted as a falcon, but here he is fused with the horizon, embodied in a lion with a human face. This fusion of terrestrial and celestial symbolism is complex. Some researchers see in this a cultural memory of the astrological purpose. The lion Leo, on the horizon Akhit, guarding the sunrise. The stele itself shows two images of the Sphinx carved atop a rectangular shape that some interpret as a temple or even a chamber beneath it, adding fuel to the Hall of Records legend. While this is speculative, the central fact remains. By the New Kingdom, the Sphinx was already considered an immensely ancient, divine entity whose origins were lost to history. The implications ripple backwards. If Thutmose IV in 1400 BCE saw the Sphinx as ancient, how much more ancient was it for Khafre in 2500 BCE? Could Khafre's own involvement have been a similar act of restoration and appropriation? The lack of any contemporary inscription from Khafre claiming the Sphinx's construction is a glaring absence. If he had built such a wonder, surely he would have proclaimed it. Its silence in Fourth Dynasty records is deafening. The first textual mention of the statue comes centuries later. This absence suggests that for the Old Kingdom Egyptians, the Sphinx was not a new achievement to boast about, but a feature of the sacred landscape, a given, a monument from the time of the gods. The dream stele, therefore, becomes a crucial piece of testimonial evidence. It is not geological data, but a human document that speaks to the statue's perceived age. It captures the moment a pharaoh from a golden age of Egyptian power looks upon the Sphinx not as a peer's work, but as a relic from a distant, divine epic. It frames the Sphinx not as the beginning of a story, but as a chapter from a much older book, a book whose first pages had already turned to dust long before the first pyramid's foundation stone was laid. The stele stands as a granite witness, testifying across 34 centuries to the profound, unsettling antiquity that has always clung to the guardian of Giza. The stalemate between traditional archaeology and geological revisionism demanded a new kind of evidence, one that could bridge the gap between human history and earth science. In the late 20th and early 21st centuries, the hope emerged that technology could provide an unbiased arbiter. Scientists turned to tools that could see what the naked eye could not, probing the stone's secrets without the need for destructive digging or controversial interpretation of surface features. The quest to date the Sphinx entered the digital age, but instead of providing simple answers, technology only deepened the mystery, revealing a monument far more complex than anyone had imagined. Seismic surveys became a primary tool. By sending sound waves into the ground and measuring their reflections, researchers could map anomalies beneath the surface. These surveys, conducted at various times, consistently showed the same tantalizing hints: cavities and what appeared to be tunnels or chambers in the bedrock beneath and around the Sphinx. One survey suggested a large, rectangular room beneath the front paws. Others indicated possible tunnels running northwards towards the Great Pyramid and southwards under the Sphinx's body. The Egyptian authorities often explained these as natural fissures or voids in the limestone, but to investigators like John Anthony West and later researchers, the shapes seemed too regular, too geometric to be entirely natural. The data was fuzzy, open to interpretation, but it was enough to keep the flame of the Hall of Records legend burning brightly. Even more revealing was the use of thermal imaging. In a project led by archaeologist Dr. Abbas Mohammed Abbas, thermal cameras were used to scan the Sphinx during the cool desert night and the following sunrise. As the stone heated and cooled at different rates, the cameras could detect variations in subsurface density. The results were startling. The images showed a significant temperature differential around the Sphinx, suggesting that the density of the stone was not uniform. More intriguingly, they revealed what appeared to be an anomaly behind a section of the Sphinx's haunch, a region where the stone seemed less dense, possibly indicating a hidden passage or a chamber that had been backfilled. Another anomaly was detected near the elbow. These thermal hints suggested that the Sphinx might not be a solid mass of rock, but a structure potentially containing voids or features within its body, something never before considered. Perhaps the most ambitious technological approach was the attempt to date the stone surface directly using seismic and acoustic analysis to measure the depth of the weathering. The principle was to calculate how long it would have taken for the weathering to reach its current depth, given specific climatic conditions. While fraught with variables, initial attempts using these methods yielded estimates that supported a much greater age for the earliest weathering phases, aligning more with Scott's timeline than the orthodox one. However, these methods were controversial and not widely accepted. Each technological foray provided glimpses, not answers. They replaced one mystery with another. The Sphinx was no longer just a statue on the surface. It was a labyrinth of potential secrets within and beneath. The official response to these findings was often cautious to the point of dismissal. Further investigation was routinely stalled, citing concerns for the monument's stability. This, in turn, fueled the perception of a cover-up. Why not use non-invasive technology to conclusively map these anomalies? The tension between the promise of discovery and the imperative of preservation created a frustrating limbo. The eyes of modern science, from seismic waves to infrared cameras, were now turned upon the ancient guardian, and they saw shadows, shapes in the dark that whispered of hidden rooms, of tunnels leading into darkness, of a complexity that made the simple question of its age seem almost trivial. The Sphinx, it seemed, was not just older than we thought. It was more cunningly built, more filled with secrets, a Russian nesting doll of stone whose final layer had yet to be glimpsed. The isolation of the Sphinx as a unique, anomalous monument is a pillar of the orthodox argument. If it were truly from a lost civilization, shouldn't there be other similar works? Proponents of the older Sphinx theory argue that there are, but we have not been looking for them in the right way or in the right places. They point to a scattered, faint trail of enigmatic sites and artifacts across Egypt and the wider world, not as copies of the Sphinx, but as potential cousins, products of the same forgotten epoch or the same lost school of knowledge. In Egypt itself, the most compelling echoes are not statues, but structures. The Osirian, a massive, stark building found behind the temple of Seti I at Abydos, is a profound puzzle. Built of gigantic, unadorned blocks of red granite and limestone, it sits deep below the water table, giving it a primal, subterranean feel. Its style is cyclopean, brutalist, and completely unlike the graceful, inscribed halls of the Seti temple above it. The dynastic Egyptians themselves seem to venerate it as the tomb of the god Osiris, a relic from the first time. Its architectural fingerprints, the massive blocks, the lack of decoration, the precise but simple joins, feel eerily similar to the core masonry of the Sphinx and Valley temples at Giza. Could it be another pre-dynastic survivor, later embraced and sanctified by the Pharaohs? Farther afield, the search leads to the scorching western desert. At the site of Nabta Playa, a stone circle dated to over 7,000 years ago shows a sophisticated understanding of astronomy, aligning with the summer solstice and the brightest stars. Its builders were cattle herders in a green Sahara. While not monumental in scale, it proves that complex ritual and astronomical knowledge existed in the region millennia before the pyramids. Could the people of Nabta Playa have been cultural descendants of the Sphinx's creators, preserving a fragment of their sky lore as the desert encroached? The most dramatic parallels, however, are found beyond Egypt. The lion has been a global symbol of power and guardianship. The terraced lion of the Mycenaean gate in Greece, though much later, speaks to a shared symbolic language. But the comparison that truly ignites speculation is with the far older and recently discovered site of Göbekli Tepe in Turkey. Dated to over 11,000 years ago, it consists of massive, T-shaped limestone pillars arranged in circles, carved with intricate reliefs of animals. It was built by hunter-gatherers, shattering all previous assumptions about Neolithic capabilities. Göbekli Tepe is not a sphinx, but it shares a disturbing and revolutionary set of characteristics. It is megalithic, it is precisely aligned, it is covered in elaborate animal iconography, and it was deliberately buried for millennia. This last point is critical. Göbekli Tepe was not abandoned to ruin. It was carefully, intentionally backfilled with rubble, preserving it. This act of deliberate interment mirrors what might have happened to the Sphinx, swallowed by the sands of a changing climate, not through neglect, but as part of a ritual ending or a desperate act of preservation. These scattered sites do not form a clear, connected empire. They are more like distant bonfires seen from a mountain peak, suggesting human activity in the deep past was more complex, more interconnected, and more capable than our textbooks allow. They suggest that the Sphinx might not be an orphan, but the most famous and grandest survivor of a widespread archaic worldview, a worldview that expressed itself in massive stone, aligned with the heavens, built by cultures we are only beginning to recognize. The Sphinx's true family may not be the pyramids beside it, but these other whispers from the dawn of time, all asking the same unsettling question. What exactly were we doing in those lost millennia between the ice and the first cities? The search for the Sphinx's builders, therefore, expands from a hole in the Egyptian desert to a global re-examination of the shadows at the very beginning of our story. To understand the possibility of the Sphinx's greater antiquity, one must leave the desert and journey in time to a world utterly alien to today's Egypt. This is not an exercise in imagination, but a reconstruction based on ice cores, fossil pollen, and geological strata. The story begins at the end of the last ice age, around 12,000 years ago. As the great glaciers retreated, the global climate underwent a violent, chaotic reorganization. For North Africa, this meant a dramatic shift in monsoon patterns. Rain that once fell elsewhere now deluged the Sahara. What is now the world's largest hot desert became a vast, rolling savanna, a green and vibrant land. This period, known as the Neolithic subpluvial or the African humid period, lasted from roughly 10,000 BCE to around 5,000 BCE. Lake Chad, now a shrunken remnant, was an inland sea larger than the Caspian is today, known as Mega Lake Chad. Rivers snaked across the landscape, flowing north into the Mediterranean. The wildlife was that of a Serengeti. Herds of elephants, giraffes, antelope, and hippos thrived. Early human groups followed these herds, fishing in the lakes and eventually domesticating cattle. Cave paintings in the Tassili Enadjer Plateau in Algeria, hundreds of miles into the current desert, vividly depict this lost world. Swimmers, boats, and lush scenes of abundance. This is the climatic window, the only plausible window in which the heavy rainfall-induced erosion on the Sphinx could have occurred. The weathering patterns speak of not just occasional showers, but of sustained, periodic, heavy downpours over centuries, perhaps millennia. The soft limestone of the Giza Plateau would have been part of this green landscape, likely a rocky outcrop overlooking a verdant plain or a river valley. The stone would have been stained by soil, anchored by grass roots, and most importantly, subjected to the relentless sculpting power of sheet runoff from rains. This was the environment of the Sphinx's youth, a world of water and life. Then the climate changed again. Around 5000 BCE, the Earth's orbital precession continued its slow cycle, and the monsoon belt shifted southwards once more. The rains faltered, then failed. The green Sahara began to die. The grasslands withered, the lakes evaporated, the rivers sank into the sand. The desert we know began its inexorable advance. This was not a gentle fade, but evidence suggests a rapid collapse occurring over perhaps just a few centuries. For the human and animal populations, it was a catastrophe of epic scale. They were forced to retreat to the last refuges of water, the oases, and ultimately the great river valley of the Nile. This cataclysm provides a crucial context for the mystery. If a monument like the Sphinx existed in that green world, its fate would have been sealed by the changing climate. First, the erosion from rain would have ceased as the rains stopped. Then, as the vegetation died, the unprotected soil would have begun to blow away. The sands of the newly formed desert would have started to swallow the statue, beginning its long, intermittent burial. The Sphinx would have transitioned from a landmark in a fertile landscape to a spectral, half-buried relic in a wasteland, its meaning and makers forgotten by the scattered survivors struggling for survival along the Nile. This climatic timeline is the bedrock of the revisionist argument. It provides not just a mechanism for the erosion, but a dramatic narrative for the monument's disappearance from history. The Sphinx becomes a casualty of a global climate shift, a sentinel left behind by a retreating world. Its subsequent rediscoveries by early dynastic Egyptians were not finds of a new monument, but the re-emergence of a relic from a prior age, a ghost from the green Sahara that had become a mythic, first time in their own cosmology. The climate data does not carve stone, but it paints the backdrop against which the stone was carved, a backdrop of abundance that vanished, leaving only a rain-scarred guardian as a tombstone for a lost world. One of the most persistent and powerful arguments against a vastly older Sphinx is technological. The orthodox narrative places its construction firmly within the known progression of Egyptian stone working. We have copper chisels, stone pounders, wooden sledges, and ramps. We have quarries, workmen's villages, and a clear, if awe-inspiring, methodology. To propose a date of 10,000 BCE or earlier is to enter a technological void. What tools could these hypothetical builders have used? Did they possess knowledge lost to later ages, or were their methods deceptively simple, hidden in plain sight? The revisionist answer often begins not with mystery, but with observation. The core construction of the Sphinx and its surrounding temples is not about finesse, but about mass and removal. The Sphinx was not built, it was uncovered. It is a subtractive sculpture carved from a single limestone knoll by the simple, brute force process of removing everything that was not the Sphinx. This requires no advanced technology, only organization, determination, and a lot of time. The tools needed could have been harder stones, dolerite pounders, to smash and pulverize the softer limestone. Even in the dynastic period, the Egyptians used stone tools for the heavy, rough work. The concept is Neolithic, not futuristic. Where the argument gains complexity is in the megalithic temples. The gigantic limestone core blocks, some weighing over 200 tons, were quarried from the Sphinx enclosure. Moving them even a short distance is a Herculean task. But again, the principle is simple: leverage, rollers, ropes, and vast amounts of human labor. Wet sand or clay as a lubricant under sledges is a known technique. What is required is not a secret science, but a highly organized society with a compelling reason to devote generations to the task. We see this level of social organization at Göbekli Tepe, a hunter-gatherer site, proving that complex communal effort for ritual purposes predates agriculture and metal tools by millennia. The real puzzle, often highlighted, is the later addition of the granite. The multi-hundred-ton granite blocks in the Valley Temple, quarried in Aswan and transported over 500 miles, represent a logistical peak. But this feat is attributed to the Fourth Dynasty, the orthodox builders. The revisionists turn this on its head. If Khafre's people could do that with copper tools and rope, why does the same civilization get credit for the limestone work but not the Sphinx itself? The implication is that the granite work is the later, more advanced phase, a restoration of something older using newly mastered techniques. The older work, the limestone core, might have been achieved with even simpler, cruder, but equally effective methods. The most speculative thread concerns the precision. The joints between the giant limestone blocks in the Sphinx temple are tight and careful, but not the superhuman, laser-cut precision of some later granite works. It is a functional, powerful masonry. Some researchers, however, point to the severe erosion itself and ask a radical question. What if the Sphinx we see is not the original finished product? What if the water erosion is so deep that it has obliterated finer details, inscriptions, or tool marks that could have told us exactly how it was made? The statue may have been far more refined, its surface possibly sheathed in a protective casing or finely carved details that were completely washed away by millennia of rain. In this view, we are not looking at the builder's handiwork, but at its ruin, a ghostly negative shape after the climate had its way. The tool marks are gone, erased by the very element that now provides the best clue to its age. The builder's toolkit, therefore, remains frustratingly invisible, not because it was advanced, but because time and weather have destroyed the very evidence that would show us its simple human nature. As the water erosion theory gained public traction, mainstream Egyptology did not remain idle. They embarked on their own missions of discovery, not to explore older possibilities, but to solidify the existing timeline. Their efforts focused on finding concrete, indisputable evidence linking the Sphinx inextricably to the reign of Khafre and the Fourth Dynasty. They sought to anchor the statue firmly in its known archaeological context, to prove it was an organic part of the Giza pyramid complex, not a pre-existing alien insertion. This counter-offensive took shape in careful excavations around the Sphinx itself. One key area of focus was the so-called Sphinx Ditch, the enclosure from which the statue was carved. Archaeologists meticulously sifted through the layers of sand and debris that had filled this space over centuries. Their findings were presented as a decisive blow to the older Sphinx theory. They uncovered workmen's tools, pottery shards, and even the remnants of workmen's lunches, all dating typologically to the Fourth Dynasty. They argued this proved the ditch was open and active during Khafre's time, its debris the direct refuse of the sculptors who carved the monument. To them, this was the smoking gun. The very ground at the Sphinx's feet was littered with the garbage of its builders, and that garbage was from 2500 BCE. Furthermore, studies of the workmen's barracks and quarries associated with Khafre's pyramid complex showed a vast, organized workforce present on the plateau. The logical assumption was that this same workforce, living on site, was responsible for all major projects in the immediate area, including the Sphinx. The unity of the site, the alignment of causeways, the shared construction techniques of the upper temple layers, the stylistic kinship of statuary, was emphasized as proof of a single grand architectural vision under one pharaoh. Geologists aligned with the orthodox view also published detailed analyses. They presented models showing how the specific layering of the limestone, with alternating hard and soft strata, could lead to differential weathering that mimicked rounded shapes. They argued that chemical weathering from dew and salt, combined with the abrasive, sand-blasting effect of fierce desert winds over 4,500 years, was more than sufficient to create the Sphinx's distinctive scars. They pointed to other Fourth Dynasty structures showing similar, if less severe, weathering, and dismissed the side-by-side comparison with the cliff-cut tombs by arguing the tomb walls were made of a harder, different layer of rock and were more sheltered from direct runoff. The most powerful orthodox argument remained philosophical: the complete absence of any evidence for a high civilization in Egypt prior to 3000 BCE. No cities, no writing, no complex tools, no artistic tradition leading up to something like the Sphinx. To accept the older date was to believe in a civilization that achieved a staggering artistic and engineering peak, and then vanished without a trace, leaving only one colossal monument as a calling card, a notion they dismissed as unscientific and fantastical. This counter-offensive was effective in reassuring the academic world. It provided a coherent, evidence-based narrative that required no rewriting of history. The Sphinx was brought back into the fold, its mystery explained by known processes, its age confirmed by pottery shards. For the establishment, the case was closed. But for the revisionists, every piece of this evidence was seen through a completely different lens. The pottery in the ditch, It could be from a later restoration crew clearing sand millennia after the statue was built. The workmen's barracks, they could have been used for a later renovation project. The debate had reached an impasse where the same facts were used to tell two irreconcilable stories. The Sphinx was either a 4th dynasty masterpiece or a millennia-old heirloom that the 4th dynasty found, restored, and claimed. The sands of Giza had yielded clues, but they were clues that spoke in a language everyone heard differently. Beyond the debates of geologists and the quarrels of archaeologists, the Sphinx possesses a power that transcends academic dispute, its symbolic weight. It is more than a statue. It is an idea carved in stone. Its very existence, regardless of its true age, has functioned as a time capsule, not of artifacts, but of meaning. It has served as a mirror for every age that has encountered it, reflecting back their own beliefs, fears, and questions about humanity's place in time. For the ancient Egyptians of the later dynasties, the Sphinx was a divine guardian Harmakhit, a fusion of the earthly power of the lion and the celestial authority of the sun god. It was an ancient, suffering entity to be propitiated and restored, as Thutmose IV did. It represented the first time, the mythic era when gods walked the earth, a tangible bridge to that golden age. Its weathered body was not a mystery to be solved, but a testament to its endurance and antiquity, a quality that only increased its sacredness. To the classical Greeks who visited Giza, it was a riddle. They gave it the name we use today, Sphinx, after their own mythic monster that asked travelers a deadly riddle. This was a profound reinterpretation. The Greeks saw not a sun god, but an inscrutable questioner, a symbol of the unfathomable mystery of Egypt itself. The statue became an emblem of esoteric knowledge, guarding secrets only the wise could understand. In the modern era, the Sphinx's symbolism has shifted again, powerfully shaped by the age controversy. For the orthodox scholar, it is a symbol of human achievement within a known historical framework. It represents the pinnacle of Old Kingdom power and organization, a testament to what a unified, highly motivated society can accomplish with simple tools and profound belief. It is a monument to the Pharaoh Khafre and the might of the Egyptian state. But for those who believe in its greater antiquity, the Sphinx transforms into something far more profound and unsettling. It becomes a symbol of forgotten history, a silent witness to a cycle of civilization we have not yet acknowledged. It is no longer just a royal statue, but a potential time capsule from a pre-dynastic, even prehistoric world. It symbolizes the fragility of human knowledge, the ease with which entire epochs can be swallowed by sand and time. It asks a terrifying question. If we are so wrong about this, what else are we wrong about? In this light, the Sphinx is a cautionary tale against intellectual arrogance, a stone reminder that our story may have missing chapters. This symbolic power is why the debate matters so much. It is not merely about correcting a date in a textbook. It is about two competing visions of human history. One is linear, progressive, and neatly catalogued. The other is cyclical, punctuated by cataclysms and memory loss, with deep roots reaching into a dark and unknown past. The Sphinx, sitting at the crossroads of these visions, has become the ultimate symbol of that mystery. It is a guardian not just of a physical plateau, but of the threshold between a comfortable, known history and a vertiginous alternative one. Its value lies not just in the stone it is made of, but in the endless, echoing questions it has forced humanity to ask for thousands of years. Whether built by Kafir or by the survivors of a green Sahara, its most enduring function has been to make us look at the deep past and wonder, with a mixture of dread and excitement, what we have forgotten. While scholars debate its origins, the Sphinx faces a more immediate and physical threat. It is dying. The guardian of millennia is under assault from the modern world, and its battle for survival adds a new, urgent layer to its story. The same stone that has weathered ancient rains is now crumbling at an alarming rate, turning the mystery of its past into a desperate race to secure its future. The problems are manifold and insidious. The primary villain is rising groundwater. The expansion of nearby villages and the intense irrigation for agriculture have caused the water table beneath the Giza plateau to rise. This saline water is drawn up through the porous limestone of the Sphinx's body through capillary action. As it evaporates at the surface, it leaves behind crystals of salt. These crystals expand with tremendous force, prying the stone apart from within, causing exfoliation, the surface literally peeling away in sheets. This modern salt weathering is grotesquely accelerating the natural erosion processes. Then there is pollution. The exhaust from the endless stream of tourist buses, the industry of nearby Cairo, and even the breath of millions of visitors deposit a corrosive film on the stone. This acidic grime eats away at the surface, staining it black and dissolving the very fabric of the monument. The Sphinx's chest and shoulders bear dark, weeping patches of this damage. Vibrations from traffic and urban sprawl send subtle, destructive tremors through the bedrock. Human intervention, even with the best intentions, has often caused harm. Early restoration efforts in the 20th century used cement and incompatible modern materials to plug holes and repair damaged layers. These patches, harder than the surrounding stone, trap moisture and cause further stress, leading to more cracking and spalling. It was a well-meaning but tragic mistake, like giving a fragile antique a coat of brittle plastic. The Egyptian authorities, through the Supreme Council of Antiquities, are engaged in a constant, high-stakes battle. They have installed sophisticated drainage systems around the Sphinx to try to lower the water table. The statue's neck and shoulders are a patchwork of careful stone repairs and supportive masonry. Access to the enclosure is restricted to limit vibration and humidity from visitors. Every year, teams of conservators perform delicate surgery on the stone, injecting consolidants to bind crumbling areas, cleaning surfaces with precise lasers or poultices, and monitoring every new crack with digital sensors. This conservation crisis adds a poignant, tragic dimension to the age debate. The monument that has survived hypothetical torrents from 10,000 BCE is now being defeated by the unintended consequences of the 20th and 21st centuries. It also raises a heartbreaking question for those who believe in older origins. Are we losing the very evidence that could prove the theory before it can be properly studied? Each flake of stone that falls carries with it a potential clue, a tool mark, a weathering pattern, a hint of pigment that vanishes forever. The Sphinx is no longer a static relic of the past. It is a patient in intensive care, its condition fragile and declining. The fight to save it is a race against time, a struggle to preserve not just a national icon, but a physical question mark at the dawn of history, ensuring that future generations, with perhaps better technology and more open minds, will still have a Sphinx to ponder, even if its ultimate riddle remains, for now, unanswered. The debate has raged for decades, consuming forests of paper and hours of television, yet the Sphinx sits in its enclosure, an inscrutable slab of riddles. Stepping back from the clash of theories, what remains are not answers, but a stark landscape of unresolved, haunting questions. These questions form a map of the mystery, pointing to the gaps in our knowledge, the limits of our methods, and the profound possibility that we have been telling the wrong story all along. The first and greatest question is carved into the stone itself. What caused the deep, undulating, vertical channels on the Sphinx's body and the enclosure walls? Is it the unmistakable signature of long-term water runoff, as Skok insists, locking the statue into a wet climate millennia before the Pharaohs? Or is it a complex combination of wind, salt, dew, and the peculiar weaknesses of the limestone, as orthodox geologists argue, allowing it to remain within the dynastic timeline? This is the core of the dispute, and despite countless studies, a definitive, universally accepted diagnosis remains elusive. The stone's testimony is clear, but we cannot agree on its language. Then there is the question of the head. Why is it so disproportionately small for the massive leonine body? Is this the result of a later pharaoh recarving a heavily weathered, originally larger head, perhaps that of a lion, into his own likeness? Or was it always meant to be a human head on a symbolic lion's body, with the proportions being a stylistic or technical choice of the 4th dynasty sculptors? The severe damage to the face and the loss of the nose obscure the original artist's intent, leaving us with a mutilated clue. The temples compound the mystery. Why are the lowest, foundational courses made of gigantic, perfectly fitted blocks of granite from hundreds of miles away, while the upper sections are rougher, smaller limestone? Is this evidence of two distinct construction phases, separated by vast stretches of time, with the granite being a dynastic reinforcement of a pre-existing sacred core? Or is it simply a display of Khafre's power, using the finest materials for the foundation of his grand complex? Beneath the sands, the questions grow darker. What do the seismic and thermal anomalies beneath and around the Sphinx actually represent? Are they natural fissures in the bedrock, or are they man-made chambers and tunnels, the legendary Hall of Records, or more mundane structural features? Why has there not been a coordinated, transparent, international effort to map these features conclusively with the latest non-invasive technology? The obstacles are always preservation and politics, leaving the shadows unexplored. Finally, the most encompassing question of all: if the Sphinx is vastly older, where is the civilization that built it? Is their story not one of a lost empire, but of a scattered, sophisticated Neolithic culture that was erased by the desertification of the Sahara, its survivors seeding the Nile Valley with the knowledge that would blossom as dynastic Egypt? Or is the lack of such evidence proof positive that the older date is impossible? These unanswered questions are not a failure of science or history. They are its engine. They are what transformed the Sphinx from a tourist attraction into a portal. It forces us to admit the limits of our understanding, to confront the uncomfortable fact that the past is not a neatly solved puzzle, but a vast, dark continent with only a few flickering campfires of knowledge to guide us. The Sphinx is the guardian of that darkness, and its enduring silence is the most powerful question of all. The true power of the Sphinx lies not in a potential hidden chamber or a recalibrated date. Its enduring legacy is the question mark it has carved into the heart of human history. For over a century, it has been a quiet, stone rebellion against the complacency of the known. It matters not because it proves a lost civilization, but because it relentlessly, stubbornly, suggests the possibility. In doing so, it has achieved something far greater than revising a timeline. It has opened a door in the human mind. Before the water erosion theory entered public consciousness, ancient history for most people was a settled matter. The textbooks presented a linear, tidy progression. Stone Age, Bronze Age, the rise of Mesopotamia and Egypt, the classical world. The Sphinx controversy shattered that tidy progression for millions. It introduced the thrilling, terrifying idea that the story might have missing chapters, that the book of our past might have a prologue written in a language we have forgotten. It made people look at other ancient wonders, from the megaliths of Baalbek to the walls of Sacsayhuaman, with new, questioning eyes. It fostered a healthy public skepticism toward purely academic authority, insisting that evidence from other sciences, like geology and climatology, must have a seat at the table. The debate has also exposed the very human drama behind the pursuit of knowledge. We have seen the passion of the outsider, willing to risk reputation to follow a hunch. We have witnessed the defensiveness of the establishment, guarding a hard-won narrative against what it sees as intellectual chaos. We have observed the political and cultural complexities of archaeology, where national identity, tourism, and conservation needs intersect with, and sometimes obstruct, pure research. The Sphinx has become a case study in how history is made, not just discovered. Ultimately, the Sphinx matters because it is a mirror. In its weathered face, we see our own desire for origins, our fear of oblivion, and our awe at the passage of time. It confronts us with the fragility of civilization and the relentless force of nature. Whether it is 4,500 or 12,000 years old, it stands as a monument to human ambition, a testament to the drive to create something that shouts across the millennia, "We were here." The unresolved mystery is, in fact, its greatest gift. A solved Sphinx would be just another artifact in a museum, its file closed. But an unsolved Sphinx is a perpetual invitation. It invites the next generation of geologists with better tools, the next daring archaeologist with a new permit, the next thinker with a different perspective. It ensures that the plateau at Giza remains not just a cemetery of kings, but a living workshop of inquiry. The Sphinx, therefore, is more than a statue. It is a conversation, a slow, patient, stone-hard conversation between the past and the present, urging us to remember how much we have forgotten, and to wonder with humility and excitement what else is waiting to be remembered. The guardian does not need to speak to be heard. Its very existence is the question, and our endless search for the answer is its eternal echo. As the physical monument fights its silent war against decay, a new frontier has opened in the quest to understand the Sphinx, the digital realm. Here, freed from the constraints of fragile stone and political permission, researchers are using cutting-edge technology to recreate, analyze, and preserve the guardian in ways never before possible. This virtual sphinx is becoming a powerful tool, not to provide a final answer, but to explore the countless possibilities of its past. The process begins with laser scanning. High-resolution 3D scanners are used to map every contour, every crack, every minute detail of the statue and its enclosure. This creates a digital twin of staggering precision, a perfect, immortal copy of the Sphinx at this moment in time. This model is invaluable for conservators, allowing them to monitor millimeter-scale changes in the stone over time, tracking the progression of damage with heartbreaking accuracy. But its uses go far beyond preservation. With this digital canvas, scientists can begin to run experiments. Using software that simulates erosion processes, they can apply virtual millennia of wind, simulated salt crystallization, or, crucially, virtual rainfall to the model. They can ask the computer to show what the Sphinx would look like after 1,000 years of the heavy, monsoonal rains of the Neolithic subpluvial. Does the virtual weathering pattern match the real one? Conversely, they can model 4,500 years of the dominant desert conditions. Does that produce the sharp, wind-sand abrasions seen on the nearby tombs, or does it begin to approximate the Sphinx's rolling channels? These are complex simulations, dependent on the assumptions programmed into them, but they offer a way to test the erosion hypotheses in a controlled, repeatable environment. Furthermore, the digital model allows for radical reconstructions. With a few clicks, a researcher can digitally restore the Sphinx's nose, or add the ceremonial beard based on the fragments in museums. More intriguingly, they can experiment with the head's proportions. What if the original head was larger, shaped like a lion? They can digitally sculpt that onto the body, creating a visualization of the Sphinx as it might have appeared in a hypothetical earlier epoch. They can strip away the modern urban sprawl from the plateau and repaint the landscape as a green savanna, with the Sphinx standing sentinel over grasslands instead of asphalt and sand. This technology also holds the key to investigating the hidden. Data from ground-penetrating radar and thermal scans can be integrated into the 3D model, creating a transparent, multi-layered map of the Sphinx and its subterranean context. These digital overlays allow researchers from around the world to collaboratively analyze the anomalies, debating their shape and significance without ever lifting a trowel. The digital Sphinx is a promise and a precaution. It promises a deeper, more nuanced understanding, free from the wear and tear of physical intrusion. It is a precaution against total loss, an arc for the monument's data should the physical structure continue to deteriorate. Yet even this virtual marvel cannot settle the core debate. It can only model scenarios based on the questions we ask. It is a tool of immense power, but it is wielded by human minds still divided over the Guardian's most fundamental secret. The digital age does not solve the riddle. It simply gives us a new, more intricate language with which to ask the same ancient, enduring questions. While the core theory of a 10,000-year-old Sphinx remains outside mainstream Egyptology, its very existence has sent ripples through the academic world, subtly shifting the currents of thought and forcing a reevaluation of long-held assumptions. This heresy has not conquered the citadel. but it has undeniably rattled the gates, leaving a legacy that is more about questions asked than conclusions accepted. Its greatest impact may be in the cracks it has opened in the wall of orthodox thinking, allowing new light to fall on old stones. One significant ripple is the renewed and more serious interdisciplinary dialogue. Before the water erosion theory, Egyptology was a largely self-contained field, interpreting its past through artifacts, texts, and its own internal stylistic chronology. The controversy forced a conversation with geologists, climatologists, and astronomers. Now, even when dismissing the specific claims, responsible archaeologists must engage with data from these other sciences. A site's environmental history, its paleoclimatology, is no longer a peripheral note, but a crucial part of understanding its context. The Sphinx debate made it impossible to ignore the world beyond the artifact. This has led to a more nuanced public understanding of deep history. The idea of the Neolithic subpluvial, the Green Sahara, has moved from obscure scientific journals into popular consciousness, largely because of its connection to the Sphinx mystery. People now understand that the desert landscape of Egypt is a recent phenomenon, a dramatic climate shift that must have had a catastrophic impact on human populations. This frames dynastic Egypt not as a miraculous beginning, but as a brilliant second act, a renaissance that rose from the refugees of a drowned green world. The Sphinx, in this view, becomes a potential survivor of that first act. Within archaeology itself, the controversy has encouraged a more cautious approach to megalithic sites with unclear origins. The automatic attribution of every massive stone to a known, nearby culture is now more frequently questioned. The possibility of multiple construction phases, of ancient sites being reused and rebuilt over millennia, is taken more seriously. The Sphinx complex, with its stark contrast between core limestone masonry and later granite additions, stands as a textbook example of why this caution is necessary. It has become a case study in architectural analysis, teaching a new generation to look for the seams in the stone that tell of different hands from different times. Perhaps the most profound echo is philosophical. The Sphinx controversy has kept alive the essential spirit of scientific inquiry, doubt. It serves as a permanent, stone-built reminder that our models of the past are just that, models. They are our best interpretations based on available evidence, but they are not infallible scripture. The Sphinx stands as a monument to the unknown, a check against intellectual arrogance. It whispers that history is not a solved puzzle on a shelf, but a dark forest where our lanterns of knowledge only illuminate small, familiar clearings. The legacy of the heresy, therefore, is not a revised textbook, but a more humble, more curious, and more interdisciplinary approach to the deep past. It ensured that the story of human origins remains an open question, and for that, even its staunchest critics in their quietest moments might admit a grain of gratitude. The debate over the Sphinx's age is, at its heart, a conflict over scales of time. Human history, as taught for centuries, operates on a compact clock. The sweep from the first cities to the present spans a mere 5,000 years, a manageable narrative. The Sphinx, if the older theories hold, introduces a different chronometer, one measured not in reigns of kings or layers of pottery, but in the grinding pace of geological epochs and the slow wobble of the planet. To accept its deeper antiquity is to stretch our conception of cultural time to a breaking point, and to confront the eerie possibility of profound cycles of forgetting. The orthodox timeline is comforting in its human scale. We can trace a lineage, the development of writing in Sumer, the unification of Egypt under Narmer, the iterative improvement of pyramid design from Djoser's step pyramid to the smooth-sided giants at Giza. The Sphinx fits neatly as a contemporary of the second pyramid. This timeline allows us to feel a connection, to see these achievements as the work of people not so different from us, just earlier on the same path. The revisionist timeline introduces what geologists call deep time. It suggests that a monument of this sophistication could be a product of a period 10,000 years in the past, a span almost twice as long as all of recorded history. This scale is inhuman, vertiginous. It encompasses the entire climatic transformation of a continent, from lush grassland to barren desert. Within that vastness, what could have risen and fallen? Cultures could have achieved cohesion, developed a symbolic language in stone, and then dispersed, leaving little more than weathered rock behind. Their entire cycle, birth, flowering, and collapse, could have occurred in a silence as deep as that between the stars, all within the pre-dawn darkness before our history officially began. This perspective forces a humbling realization. Civilization, as we define it, with cities, writing, and states, may not be a one-time invention, but a recurring possibility. Like a hardy plant, it may sprout when conditions are right, bloom, and then retreat to roots when the climate turns harsh, only to sprout again elsewhere from the same rootstock of human ingenuity, but with no memory of its prior bloom. The Sphinx in this light is not an anomaly, but a survivor from a previous season. The dynastic Egyptians, discovering it, would have seen it as we might see the rusted, incomprehensible relic of a long-dead, advanced culture, something to be worshipped or feared, its original purpose already faded into myth. This recalibration of the human clock does more than age a statue. It ages our amnesia. It suggests that the distance between ourselves and the pyramid builders might be the same as the distance between the pyramid builders and the Sphinx's true creators. The loss of knowledge in that span could be total. The Sphinx thus becomes the ultimate memento mori not for a person, but for a civilization. It stares east, not just at the rising sun, but at the endless cycle of dawn and oblivion that may be the true rhythm of human history on this planet. Its silent vigil is a lesson in time itself, teaching us that our recorded past may be only the latest chapter in a much longer and largely forgotten story. To isolate the Sphinx from its surroundings is to miss the full magnitude of the mystery. The statue does not sit alone. It is the most enigmatic piece in a vast, silent machine of stone that is the Giza Plateau. The orthodox view sees this machine as a mortuary complex, built over a few frenetic decades in the 4th dynasty. The revisionist view, however, suggests the machine is far older, its components built and aligned over millennia, with the Sphinx as its primordial anchor. Looking at Giza as an integrated whole, rather than a collection of separate tombs, reveals patterns that fuel the deepest speculation. The most famous of these patterns is the celestial alignment. The 3 Great Pyramids mirror the 3 stars of Orion's belt as they appeared around 10,500 BCE, with the Nile River mirroring the Milky Way. This Orion correlation theory, proposed by Robert Bovell, remains fiercely contested. But when paired with the Sphinx's proposed alignment with Leo from the same epoch, a stunning picture emerges. The entire plateau becomes a star map frozen in limestone, commemorating a specific moment in the Great Precessional Cycle. The layout is not random, but intentional, locking the architecture to the sky in a way that would only make perfect sense once every 26,000 years. The terrestrial geometry is equally compelling. The distances and angles between the pyramids, the Sphinx, and other key points on the plateau reveal mathematical relationships involving pi and the golden ratio. While some of this may be coincidence or the result of simple, practical surveying, the consistency is striking to many. It suggests a master plan, a geometric blueprint applied to the landscape with superhuman precision. Could such a plan have been laid down in the distant past, with the pyramids built millennia later to fulfill that ancient design? The Sphinx, sitting at the geographic and symbolic heart of this geometry, would be the keystone. Then there is the water. The focus is always on the erosion on the Sphinx, but what about the evidence of water around it? The entire plateau is crisscrossed with what appear to be ancient river channels and drainage patterns. Some researchers point to the deep, weathered fissures that run through the bedrock of the pyramid fields themselves, arguing they too show signs of fluvial activity from a wetter age. If the very ground upon which the pyramids sit was shaped by water, then the entire site, not just the Sphinx enclosure, bears the fingerprint of that lost climate. The machine in this view was built into a landscape still echoing with the memory of rain. This integrated view presents Giza not as a cemetery, but as a kind of three-dimensional book, written in alignments, geometry, and weathered stone. The Sphinx is its title page. The pyramids are its chapters, and the message, if we could read it, might not be about death and the afterlife of a pharaoh, but about time, cycles, and humanity's place in a cosmos of staggering age. Whether this is a product of Fourth Dynasty genius or the legacy of a far older and forgotten school of astronomer priests is the core of the enigma. But to stand on the plateau at dawn, watching the sun crown the Sphinx's head and light the faces of the pyramids, is to feel the undeniable power of the machine as a whole. It feels designed, purposeful, and eerily synchronized with forces, celestial and terrestrial, that dwarf the lifespan of any single civilization. The Sphinx's riddle, therefore, may not be its own, but the introductory puzzle to a much greater mystery laid out across 5 square miles of Egyptian desert. Today, the wind still blows across the Giza plateau. The Sphinx still stares east, its gaze passing over the heads of tourists, the fences of restoration projects, and the sprawling city of Cairo on the horizon. The great debate has not been won. No dramatic excavation has yielded a crystal tablet from Atlantis. No definitive scientific paper has convinced the entire world of its true age. The sand, in a sense, has settled, but not over the mystery. It has settled into a permanent, uneasy truce between two realities. The Sphinx exists in a dual state, a Fourth Dynasty monument in the textbooks and museum guides, and a pre-dynastic relic in the hearts and research of a dedicated global minority. The orthodox position remains firmly entrenched in academia. Excavations continue to focus on the dynastic period, meticulously filling in the details of life under Khafre. New technologies are used to map tombs and analyze the DNA of mummies, reinforcing the known chronology. For most professional Egyptologists, the Sphinx question is a distraction, a solved problem with a fringe element that refuses to accept the evidence. Their work moves forward, building an ever richer, more nuanced picture of ancient Egypt, an empire that needs no lost civilizations to justify its awe-inspiring achievements. Yet the revisionist quest has not vanished. It has evolved. It has moved from the spotlight of prime-time documentaries into a more dispersed, digitally connected community of independent researchers, geologists, engineers, and historians. They analyze satellite imagery, share 3D models, and publish papers in alternative journals. They point to new discoveries, like the growing understanding of the climatic catastrophe that ended the Green Sahara, as contextual support for their thesis. Their focus has shifted slightly, from demanding immediate recognition to patiently accumulating what they see as an irrefutable body of cross-disciplinary evidence. They are playing a longer game, betting that the weight of data from geology, climatology, and astronomy will eventually force a paradigm shift. The Sphinx itself remains the ultimate arbiter, and it is suffering. The conservation efforts are a daily battle against an invisible enemy of salt and chemistry. Each year, the statue becomes a little more a memory of itself, a little more reliant on the supportive masonry that holds it together. This slow dissolution adds a layer of profound poignancy to the mystery. The very evidence that could hold the answer is literally crumbling to dust. The race is no longer just between theories, but between decay and discovery. So where does the story stand? It is unfinished. It is a cliffhanger spanning generations. The Sphinx's silence is no longer the silence of a solved puzzle, but the active, waiting silence of an unanswered question. It is a question that has reshaped how we think about history, time, and the fragility of human memory. Whether built by a proud pharaoh or the survivors of a lost green world, the Sphinx has achieved something perhaps greater than its builders intended. It has become an eternal question mark in stone, ensuring that our past is never truly closed, that the book of human origins always has one more page that might yet be turned. The search continues, not with the boom of dynamite or the dramatic thrust of a shovel, but with the quiet hum of a ground-penetrating radar, the meticulous click of a laser scanner, and the enduring, stubborn wonder in the human heart that looks upon an ancient face and dares to ask, "Who are you really?"